Welcome to the Thought Feeder podcast. I'm John Steven Stansel, and with me as always is Joel Goodman. And this week we have the Director of Digital Media Strategy at MIT, Jenny Lee Fowler. Thank you so much for being with us this week, Jenny.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
This week we're going to talk a little bit about your focus really on some of your personal social media accounts, especially Twitter, where I think you've really come on the scene and exploded, just dropping some serious truth bombs left and right and putting out some really good information lately. And we're going to talk about that here in a moment. But first, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself? How did you get into higher ed social media? What's, your job duties in your daily life at MIT look like?
Sure. So, how I got into higher ed is a story in itself, but I had an entire career in broadcast journalism, actually. And I thought I would die on the anchor desk, but the industry changed and my priorities changed. And so I took a couple of left turns in my career and somehow was really, really fortunate enough to land in higher ed. First, I was in the digital content and editorial space, and social media just became a greater part of my duties. And I really thought, gosh, if I can pivot into a 100% social media job in higher ed, that would be great. And my current position came along, and so here I am. I'm in charge of developing and executing institute-wide social media initiatives and campaigns. I provide consultation and direction for more than 200 department labs and centers. I think everyone can relate it to how siloed all of their university systems are. And I manage the Institute's flagship Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn accounts. I also lead a social media working group, which currently has 160 members. So, that in a nutshell is what I do. Just like everyone else, I I post. Yeah, I look at content. I'm going through content. I'm talking to people. I'm advising people, consulting people, meetings. That's probably what everyone day. My day looks like what everyone's day looks like. I think.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think a lot of us kind of, social media wasn't the plan. Like I've always said, this wasn't a job when I was in college. It wasn't something I prepared for. In fact, kind of a similar background. I got my undergrad degree in radio television production, and kind of thinking, oh, maybe I was going to go into television news, but instead got my master's in literature. Thought I was going to get my PhD and teach literature for a living, but social media ended up being what I ended up doing. And where I thought I was going to be writing giant novels, I'm writing tweets of 280 characters or less. And
Hey, it's all storytelling.
exactly. And you've really in recent days kind of proven yourself a master of this, I
Oh
think.
my, thank
And
you.
when we first kind of met online,
Mhm.
we had been following each other for just fairly recently, from the past couple of months. And this new name on my Twitter feed just would keep popping up with these really insightful little tweets about social media marketing and higher ed. And it was always kind of, it's like, oh, there's Jenny Lee Fowler again. And I had tweeted that I was making a concerted effort, which over the past few months, to at least once daily start tweeting
Mhm.
about social media marketing and in higher ed, but also in a broader sense. And you DM'd me saying that this was your quarantine experiment, that you were doing something very similar and trying to, on your personal account, tweet your daily thoughts about social media. So can you tell us a little bit about how did you come about this quarantine experiment? Why have you done it, and some of the things that you've learned?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you. That's incredibly flattering. So I am just, yeah, that's hitting me right here. That's thank you for those flattering words. I have to say, so the first couple of weeks working from home, they were rough. I don't know if you remember your first weeks, but they were, gosh, I wasn't in a really great space, and I was thinking, if I continue down this path, it's not gonna be good and it's not gonna look good for me. So, I made a couple of commitments, and I was just, for the sake of wellness, I was thinking I need to like move on a regular basis. Like, I need to move my body on a regular basis, and I need a challenge, or I need a project to commit myself to. And so I think that day I signed up for a free webinar. There's so many webinars and talks and sessions going on right now. And I signed up for a webinar, and one of the presenters said, try tweeting every day for 30 days and see, and see what works. And I was like, okay, you know what? That's my project. I had been neglecting my own personal channels, and mostly because I have a kid, and I like to, when if I'm present, I like to really, really be present. And I think that I, in the ladder of what's a priority, my own personal channels were not a priority. But I went, after hearing that on that webinar, I was like, okay, this is going to be sort of my pet project. And so I started tweeting like on April 14th. I just started sharing a thought or something, an observation or something that I've learned in my, years as managing the social channels for MIT. And yeah, it was interesting. At first, it was fun. I was getting engagements, and some got more than others. And it was funny because on day 26. I was just kind of like, I don't know. This seems to be doing well, but like I started off with less than 1,200 followers, and I just was kind of teetering on the 12, 10, and I'd lose two and I'd gain two and I'd lose two. And, I always tell people, don't get caught up in the numbers. Just, you got to do you and the rest will come. And day 26, I'm like, I don't know. Maybe this just isn't for me, or maybe my thoughts aren't very insightful. Maybe they're moldy old, and maybe they're just sort of like, common sense. And then I saw your tweet, and it inspired me. You kind of said something about, I made a promise to, share an insight, and people want to hear what you've learned, and people want to hear what you've observed. And I saw that, and I saw it at the right time, because I was just like, yes, okay, that's all I need. And I even DM'd you, and I said, thank you for this tweet. I felt compelled to say thank you for this tweet, because I've kind of promised myself this pet project, and I'm on day 26. I was losing motivation. And can I tell you, from that to 2 days later, I had sort of this tweet that resonated with you and with people. And from there, I think I went from like 12, like from 1215 to like 1267 followers. And while that might not seem like a lot, like I always tell people, again, don't compare your numbers. Like my numbers are never going to be like MIT's numbers, but that's a 4% growth in one day. At MIT, if we have around a 1% growth in a month, that's huge. Like usually we see like a 0.9% growth. But if you're growing incrementally like that, then you're within the year you're going to be growing exponentially. And I always tell this to people, but I kind of, how you don't often take your own advice. So I really kind of sat down and was like, this is okay. All right. I feel like I've broken through a plateau, and then it just started becoming fun. I think they found value in what I was sharing, and now people are asking me follow-up questions, which is awesome. That's what I do a lot in my role at work every day, is like, I meet with communicators that are now tasked with managing a social media account for like a MIT department lab or center. And some of them are very new to it. They're just like, I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't know how to do this. And then we start, then we start from there. And other people are very advanced, and they want to talk about how to break into the Chinese market, which is an entirely different strategy. So they, from wherever they are, we start from there. So yeah, like it just started becoming fun. And I feel like I was breaking through. And from there, you asked me to come on to this podcast, and so it's already, I guess, paying dividends for me. Or it's growing. My little pet project is growing.
Excellent. Well, I'm so glad you've decided to stick with it because, I would say, I follow around 1,000 people on Twitter, and there's a handful of people that when they tweet, I stop and I'm like, whatever I'm doing, I see it there, like, okay, we're going to read what they say. And you've moved yourself into those ranks with some of
That's
the stuff. So
amazing.
one thing I'll say right now for anyone listening, if you're not following Jenny, is at the Jenny Lee Li. So stop what you're doing, like go ahead and log into Twitter and follow Jenny. Um, so one thing to kind of think about too, and I think Joel, do you want to talk about this a little bit about how some people are kind of nervous about their own social accounts.
Yeah. So one thing that JS and I have noticed, and probably a lot of other people have noticed, that for those of us that are not, I think not just in social media, I think on the front lines of communicating for our institutions or our employers, if we're kind of on the fringes of higher ed or in other industries, we kind of tend to think we have to back off on maybe being completely transparent or being completely open and honest in the way that we communicate on our personal accounts, just because maybe an employer is going to be upset about it, or we risk having a little bit more pressure at work, things like that. Do you experience that at all, or have you? And how do you think in terms of how you approach your own social accounts and being and having and creating your own voice? What are good ways that other people, or good tips other people could take away from that communication style to kind of find their own voice and not live and work in fear, I guess? Is this kind of a fear-based thing?
Yeah, no, I think this question is really interesting because if you are going to apply for a job with social media in the title, at least, even when there are partners that ask me to interview a social media candidate, candidate for a social media position, the first thing I do is look at their personal social media accounts, and I want to see that they're active in them.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting, right? I find that you have to be a personal social media user in order to do it professionally. So I would really encourage people to be active, but I would say that what might have kept me from being active in it was imposter syndrome.
Mm.
You know, you just feel, I knew that I was doing a good job because MIT kept me around. Yeah, they gave me a new title, and so I knew that I was doing a good job. But you just wonder if like these little observations that you think or that you've learned over time, if other people would find value in them,
Yeah.
or if people would say no, no, duh, Jen, we all know that. So there's this fear of being a fraud, I think. But through this experiment, I've learned that people, share your information, share your ideas, because not everyone has gone through that process that you have.
Hmm.
Now I think of it, if I can save someone time by, sharing what I've learned, I think that's great. Like, I'm a sharer by nature, and I'm a connector of people. I'd say share your ideas, because if you've had an aha moment, share that aha moment, because people are going to find value in that.
I think that's interesting. I've never actually chalked it up to imposter syndrome, but I think that's actually a really insightful kind of thought process to go down. For me, it's always been like less on the social media side because I'm not a social media manager. I'm just a general marketer in general. But the thoughts in terms of like blog posts to write, talk proposals to submit to conferences and things like that. There's a level of me, it's like, well, this is obvious. This is too simplistic. Why should I write about this? Or I've seen 20 other people write about this thing. Why I don't need to do it. Why shouldn't I? But I think you're right. Like there's still going to be people within your own circles and within your own network that haven't seen those ideas or haven't read the same articles as you, or maybe just need to hear it one more time from someone else that they connect with because they interact with them a little bit more often and that sort of a thing. And I think that's a really interesting and insightful thought.
Yeah, and on the imposter syndrome topic, we all get imposter syndrome, and I think by
No, I
sharing,
don't remember JS.
oh yeah, you don't. Everyone except Joel gets imposter syndrome.
That's awesome.
I told Aaron Sapinka that so on a couple episodes ago.
I listened to that episode. That was Aaron's awesome.
Aaron's the best.
Incredible, but we all, with the exception of Joel, get imposter syndrome, and I think it's helpful when we see other people share ideas that are similar to ours, and especially, that we might respect, or, also at an institution like MIT, I think there's an assumption that the people running social media or doing communications at larger institutions are always on top of their game and super confident. And it's like, no, they have the same, when I read some of those tweets, some of the same issues too. Being at a, relatively smaller institution in Arkansas, I know from a fact personally, sometimes I feel like, oh man, I bet you if I was at a bigger school, I wouldn't have all the same problems I have right now. But we all have those problems, or just a different set of problems that are just slightly shaded a little bit differently. So I think, as being professionals in the field and sharing our experiences, we're helping ourselves, and we're helping others through our own sharing of our shared experiences.
Totally, 100%. That is definitely something that this process has affirmed for me, I think, for sure.
And then on top of that, I think one thing I've learned, my experiments lasted a little, predates quarantine a little bit, but finding my personal voice on Twitter has helped me become a better communicator for the institution I represent. And this is one thing I'm kind of curious, because I've noticed a little bit, looking at some tweets of yours and from MIT, and seeing, little touches of you there. And one example that I came across recently that I was really impressed with, and it took me a second, and then I saw, okay, wait, and again, I may be off. I'm reading into the story a little bit, but recently, from the MIT Twitter account, there was a letter regarding to the MIT community regarding efforts to chart MIT's course for the summer, fall, and beyond, kind of expressing what's going on with COVID-19.
Hmm.
And then
Hmm.
the tweet immediately after is TLDR, we're starting to test what's doable for the short term. And I love that. And I realized a second afterwards, wait, I think Jenny tweeted something about TLDR post on her personal account, and that kind of migrating itself over to the professional account, which I think is amazing. I haven't seen that, this little tactic done on especially in relation to COVID communications. But I really like how you've got this one tweet that's wonderful, but I mean, it's kind of the boilerplate, here's our letter of things, and then immediately tweet following in plain language, here's what you need to know.
Yes.
In what ways do you think your quarantine experiment has helped you in a professional capacity in your day-to-day job duties?
So I will say that you're incredibly observant. That was a very, very good catch. And that's it's funny because that's a strategy that we just recently employed, because we were saying these letters are long, they're lengthy, and so how do we really give more information quickly? Because right now there's a lot of information out there that we need to disseminate. So how do we pare it down? And TLDRs they're just a part of MIT vernacular and culture. Everyone uses them in emails. And so we just started employing that. But the reason why I share that on my personal account is because as a manager of an account, I found this tactic to be successful. Or, I think it's working or it's resonating with our audience, which is why I would share it. I only want to share the good stuff, right? You only want to share what worked. Although, I would encourage, I should actually start sharing the mistakes I've made too, so people can learn from them now that I think about it. But I think it has helped because it really helps me um, sort of hone in that one lesson or that one point. Like, I don't want to say point because it's not like a point, but part of my job is to make the social media experience across the MIT community equal, the same, right? So whether you're experiencing our athletics account or if it's the mechanical engineering, School of Mechanical Engineering account or our Mind, Hand, Heart account, or a center, like I want everyone to know that I am a resource for them. We're dealing with a lot of people that are one man communication teams, one man, one woman communication teams. And a lot of times social media is not their forte per se. It's just something that they've adopted. So I always want to make clear that I'm their team, right? Like if they want to help think through strategy, or if they want to know best practices, or what sort of what's worked for others in the MIT community, I'm here, to advise them, to consult. And I found that like when you really have to focus your responses to 280 characters or less, it helps me sort of really focus those lessons that I want to share with the rest of social media managers throughout the MIT community. So I feel like it's really kind of sharpened my ability to do that, if that makes any sense.
Oh, that makes total sense. Yeah, I think the same for me is kind of crafting those personal tweets where I'll even, I get an idea and I'll write it out in Twitter and then pause and just save it in my drafts folder, and then like 2 or 3 days later cut out some words, or kind of fine tune it, or even maybe start with a thought and work backwards. Okay, what's I have this nugget I want to share. What's the best way to get this across on Twitter? Is it a pithy list? Is it a meme? What is it? How can I best express this one single truth I want to get out there? And it can really be a challenge sometimes, but I really enjoy it, and I think it does help me to do it better on my professional account as well.
Totally. Same. Yeah, same. I have I don't I like Google Keeps. I have like a Google Keep document with just like potential tweets or tweets that I've done. And I mean, it just keeps getting longer and longer, but sometimes I'll put a thought in there and I'll just look at it and refine it. And I don't know, you just know when you feel like you're ready to share it. But I'm the same.
Sometimes I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about, kind of being concerned about future employment and what kind of things you're tweeting out from your personal account. So sometimes if I'm having a bad day and I tweet, I kind of type a little, to put it politely, passion forward. I'll let it sit in the drafts folder for like a week, and if I still feel like I want to put that out there, okay, I can do that a week later. I've got about 10 tweets in my drafts folder about how much I hate Canva. So those will be spread out over the next several months.
Yeah, I listened to that podcast. I admire your passion.
Yeah, one of the few, then. um, so that said, let's talk about, who on Twitter right now do you look to for inspiration? Maybe not just on Twitter and social media in general that you see, and maybe some universities that you think are doing a job, but more over individuals that you look towards. You mentioned you have a three scroll rule.
Mhm.
When you're thinking about following someone, if you scroll past three times and there's nothing that really stops you, you don't follow them. So who are the people that got the follow on the first scroll, and maybe you pause when you're going through Twitter to be sure that you read every time?
This is a tough one. So, NASA does a brilliant job, right? Um, I'm really enjoying the National Park Service account lately. And I know we're talking about Twitter, but they're killing it on Instagram. I don't know if you follow them on Instagram, and
Oh
the
yes,
you know
oh,
the
they're amazing.
yeah, their descriptions on Instagram, like they're so good. I learned, from that, and have translated into our posts and Twitter posts and Instagram posts. Um, I just feel like there are flashes of brilliance like everywhere, or flashes of inspiration everywhere. Like, you remember when it was the Oreo cookie Super Bowl tweet when
Oh, of course, yes.
yeah, that was so amazing. And I remember, one time, the University of Wisconsin Madison, they just had such a great moment where, I don't know if you guys were, are you Game of Thrones
Oh
watchers?
yes, very
Maybe.
much so.
Okay. So I mean, I don't know. I don't think at this point I'm like spoiling anything. I hope not. But do you remember the hold the door reveal?
Yeah, yeah.
And the next day,
I'm still
university.
heartbroken.
Oh, yeah, I know. But the day after that reveal, like, University of Wisconsin-Madison had a tweet that was just "hold the door," period, and they posted images of really ornate doors on their campus. And I was like, I love this. This is the tweet of the year. I love this tweet. So I just feel like, there are just flashes of inspiration everywhere out there, So it's just kind of like you got to keep your eye open at all times. But I will say, like recently, Matthew Kobach, am I saying his name?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I just feel like he is a great follow, because he's just so good at putting together a witty but insightful tweet. And I say one thing that I really did learn from him was that you don't need an image or a GIF to go with every tweet, right? Just a clean, clear idea, and it hopefully will resonate.
Yeah, he's definitely a master of doing that. Yeah, if you're not following him, he is the social media manager for the New York Stock Exchange, and
Mhm,
his social account is all just very clean, very sometimes very cutting comments on social media marketing. But
mhm.
he's a very insightful and powerful follow if you're not following him already. Let's close it out with one last question. And Jenny, do you have any advice for those listeners who may want to take a similar quarantine kind of 30-day tweet a day experiment? What advice do you have for them?
I would say don't overthink it. I know that sounds kind of funny because, I'll write something out and I'll stare at it and look at it over and over again to refine it. But what I do mean by that is if you have a thought, then share the thought. Like I think the other day I had the thought like, gosh, when you post to every channel using a social media management system, and you just post one post on every channel, that's like a reply all email. And I just had that as a passing thought, and I thought I think there's something there, and I wrote it down. So I would say if you just have like a passing thought like that, just jot it down and then craft it into a tweet, right? So I'd say don't overthink the initial nugget that you had or the initial thought. Maybe spend some time like really like refining it to make sure you only use the words that you need to communicate that thought. But yeah, like I don't think we give ourselves enough credit of like first of all, there we have so many thoughts a day, but some of them are really insightful and they're worth sharing. And so I would encourage people to share them. Try it, and then you'll see what works and what doesn't. You know, I will say this during the experiment. It took days, right? I was posting one tweet a day, and then it took for day 26, 27, 28 for it to really take off. But if I hadn't had those posts prior to, right? If people came to my account and did the three scrolls and say that content wasn't there, I don't think I would have gotten those follows. So I would say keep at it because you're kind of building yourself like a little bit of a library of content that when people do come and decide, they'll say, oh, I think, I like what she's sharing and decide to follow you. So you need to put in sort of that time, and then things will start, I think, happening toward the end of those 30 days.
Yeah, I think that's perfect advice. I think sometimes, even one struggle I have is I can be my own worst critic and be it just kind of demand perfection for every tweet. And it's my personal account. If I'm going to tweet something every day, they're not all going to be winners. Sometimes I'm going to tweet out a dud, and that's fine. It doesn't my reputation is not ruined if I post something that's not absolutely perfect. But it's a matter of taking the
No, we're
time.
so hard on
I
ourselves,
know.
right? We're so hard on ourselves.
And all of those, it leads up to becoming better at it and sharing. And you post something that doesn't resonate with a lot of people, that they go over it and they'll forget about it, and then the next thing you post kind of explodes. Or sometimes you'll surprise yourself. I think my most successful tweet was something I almost didn't tweet. It was I didn't think it was funny. I thought it was kind of overdone. It was a Tiger King gif. I just like what was it? Social media managers, what's your target audience for this? Clients, and there was the Tiger King saying, on the internet worldwide. And I was in the drive-through waiting in line at Wendy's, and I was like, "Ah, whatever, I'll send it. It's Friday afternoon." And it just blew up. And, sometimes you'll surprise yourself that those things, we talked about imposter syndrome earlier, those things that don't really seem that profound to you might really resonate with others. So, yeah, keep at it.
Yeah, I mean, you had that funny thought and you shared it and it resonated with people, you know? And I think too, I think sometimes you have to let your people find you. You have to let your niche find you, you know? I think another thing that I've learned was like those days where I was like gaining one, losing a follower, gaining, one, losing two. I think, my audience was starting to find me, and you have to let that just happen organically.
Yeah, exactly. I got a retweet from somebody who is really big in the sports social media world, and I got a lot of sports social media followers all at once in one day, and I think I'm going to lose them all very quickly because I am not a sports person. Like, very quickly they're going to learn that it's nothing but higher ed social media tweets and Dune references, and but that's fine. They're not my niche. I'm not an athletics person, so yeah, find your niche, find your audience, and speak to that. So awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jenny. Thank you for being on the show and taking the time to be with us today. And like we said, if you're not following Jenny already, get on that because she's killing it out there, and there's some really she's putting out some information that you need to read.
Thanks. This was great. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks as always for listening to the Thought Feeder podcast. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, and we would appreciate a follow, a subscribe, a rating, a review, whatever you can give us. We are at ThoughtFeedPod on Twitter, and you can also find us at thoughtfeederpod.com, where all of the episodes are listed and links to every possible subscription service that we are on. Thanks again for listening. Thought Feeder is hosted by Joel Goodman and John Steven Stansel and edited by Joel Goodman. Thought Feeder is sponsored by University Insight.